Hello, everyone, and welcome for this UX for Good webinar, where we'll be talking about accessibility, ethics, and inclusivity, and how we can work them out with user experience. But not only that, but also how it can be compatible with, business objectives, which seems to be the challenge. This will be more of an overview, covering a lot of topics, as you already guessed. And we've included a lot of links that we'll post in the video description. Right. So today we're going to talk about let's take it three stages, basically. First is, introducing Ferpection and, why we are able to tell you a bit more about user experience and what's our own approach with doing good. Two, is this the right time to do good through user experience? And as you can guess, we're probably going to say yes to that question. And so the third part will be very much about how do we do it with examples and best practices. Right, so Ferpection and how we relate to user experience. So I guess if you are in this webinar, you are familiar with user experience as a whole. But let's say our take is that the power of user experience really comes when you can find the sweet spot between these three dimensions when building your brand offline or online or omni-channel experience. As you guess, user needs is a fundamental, is a core to this, but it's not about saying yes to everything the user tells us. It's about also coordinating this against the business objectives you may have. And I say business in a very general term. It can be any objective you have, organizational or individual. But they have to fit together, and that's where you're starting seeing something. You want to offer the market, let's say, something, and the way the market understands, adopt it is going to define its success. As simple as that, right? But on top of that, we also have a feasibility level or layer, which can be technical, it can be legal, it can be for budget reasons. That you have sort of constraints. And at the moment, let's say we are in a paradigm where for good, ethics, inclusivity, accessibility, and all of this being sustainable is more in the constraint or feasibility dimension. And we believe at Ferpection that we're not too far from changing to a new paradigm where actually it might become the objective itself, or one of the objectives that you guys will be looking at. So I think it's a very exciting time to talk about it. All right. So interestingly, I can't display everything, but here we go. So the part that is missing is just a chart, so don't worry about that. How we work on that with our customer is we're basically not simply a tool or a research actor that would execute focus group, for example. We like to listen to what our customer is trying to do and come back to them with a custom ad hoc approach, which can be based on the project or actually, extend to a full year-on-year strategy. So it's very much about thinking about, how user research can help you and, how do you organize it through methods, training, teams, and so on. So a bit more of a consulting approach to this. The second aspect is, of course, we are expert in delivering strong user insights, whether they are qualitative or quantitative, and we do that worldwide. We have a very international team and a network, assets and network of international partners. And finally, one thing that really distinguishes ourselves from our esteemed colleagues is, the concrete, hands-on, practical result that we offer through recommendations. So whatever the weakness we're trying to solve or whatever the optimization we're looking for, we always come up with custom recommendations on how we can do this. They can be very much UX led, like this mockup here, but there can be anything else, UX writing, business model, rewriting, and so on and so on. So trying to be there with you on the solution side. And just a very short slide on, being practical about sort of solutions, being, putting concrete words on what I said, just taking the middle column about how we deliver those insights. So we use a range of methods like remote user test, which is based on our own proprietary platform, individual interviews, focus group, quantitative surveys, and much more. But you get the drill. And customer satisfaction, I guess, is what makes us different. We are always measuring our customer satisfaction, which is currently at 8.7 out of 10 on the recent current score. And what customers tell us is that this satisfaction actually comes from the quality of the deliverables, the quality of the relationship, and the agility we give back to our customers. So like people from AKQA or L'Oreal, for example, here telling us. So yeah, just before we go into this, why us Ferpection working with fairly business-led companies are interested in this. So it all started with our own audit, basically. So we decided to do a sustainability audit with a green gas emissions report, and we were doing fairly well. We still have an action plan in place to go further. You can always improve, but we're a fairly light team, so and we're 100% remote, for example. So there's not so much we can do from a structural standpoint. So we decided that one of the key action we could actually take to do something different was to give access to our customers to all these good recommendations on accessibility, sustainability, diversity, and so on. And that was really the start of rewriting our recommendations, rewriting how we approach customer problems, and we're still very much in the middle of it, and will take time. But this webinar is very much part of the journey of us, trying to influence as many customers as we can. So we all move forward to that new paradigm I was talking about. And here we are, trying to do good now. But is this the right time? Well, I want to start with good news. Somehow I want to start with the end, which is that, first of all, we'll see very different concept here, but we try to summarize this as if you want to make the first steps, let's say, you are starting, you are new at this, or you may not be new, but you want to start having an influence. The kind of digital experience you want to provide should be responsible, sober, and inclusive. That's going to be some kind of, a summary of a lot of things we will say. And this kind, such experience is not incompatible with business objective, which is a really good news because, we all know that it is the main barrier to actually doing something different. So you don't have to be pure or an extremist to do good. You can actually start sort of step after step and have an influence right now, and actually the business will be thankful for it. And it's easy to understand, but we'll give you more elements to that. But basically, once you starting putting together a better experience, it will definitely work positively on your conversion. It will positively influence your brand perception, and it will widen your audience. So all of those are compatible with most business objectives. But how do we do this? Why do we do this? Again, when is it the time? The first question is very much about, are we talking about a fashionable thing? So without going too much into details, if you're hoping that we're talking about flat Earth here, it's not the case. We're wrong crowd, but we believe that concepts such as this have been, well, actually, we don't believe concepts such as this have been here for decades. When you look at, when they were started working on, it's really things that are well documented. So we are talking about trends. On some of those trends were not so visible so far, but I guess as we all see on our daily life, it's more and more about to change. And I've got 4 figures to share with you guys to establish that. And they go in pairs. Let's say the 2 top ones and the 2 bottom ones, they go hand in hand. So 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions is actually due to, we say digital technology, but for the sake of simplicity, let's just say internet. So it doesn't seem like so bad, except it's the equivalent of air traffic. So air traffic is pointed out very much so. You should not go on a plane and so on, but no one is saying you shouldn't go on the internet or don't buy the next actually some people are saying you shouldn't buy the next Apple or Android smartphone or watch, but it's not such a bad thing so far. But its contribution is as important as air traffic, so it is very actually important. What we can do all together in this community can definitely have an impact tomorrow on this, either slowing it down or decreasing it. And actually is a huge number, as you can see, with this not even conceivable number of 97 zettabytes of data created, captured, copied, and consumed in 2022 against 2 gigabytes, slightly more than 10 years ago, of course increasing. And so this number that I cannot even imagine what it exactly represents in terms of videos, for example, or whatever. A zettabyte is actually 1 trillion gigabytes. So just such a big number beyond our imagination or conceivable imagination. And looking at the 2 bottom numbers, we know that 6.3% of the UK population does not have access to internet, or they're not digital savvy enough. So for example, they can send and receive emails through their email clients, but that's about it. Beyond the Google research, which is not their reflex, there's not much more. So they can be very limited right now. So they have poor access. That's not a small number. And 10% of the UK population is affected by one or several disorders, such as dyslexia or dyspraxia, which means that if we are not able to come up with interface that address their specific needs, we immediately lose 10% of our audience, as simple as that. And there are many other affectations, or I'm not sure the exact word would be, but things we have that requires adjustments, more or less adjustments to our interfaces. So for example, I'm always asking the team to zoom in. I think it's going to be a recurring joke, but it's not because I'm getting old. It's just normal that, we can adapt the interface to my needs. Right. So, I mean, how do we take that, which is, sort of worldwide, to us at our individual level of creating experience, of experience creators? Well, which is somewhat the same thing, understanding the footprint, measuring it, and trying to reduce it. The new thing is that it's going to be applied to the environment, the economy, and individuals, whereas the economy was more or less our economy. Now it's the economy, individuals, as the effect we can have on people, and the environment on the environment around people. Again, it's a very big thing, and there's two approach. Basically, down the line of this presentation, we're going to see practical examples, but practical examples are good because they are concrete. The bad thing is that you lose a sort of strategic approach. So a couple of slides first, so you guys can see how this can be approached with a higher view. So first approach to keeping this a bit strategic is to identify the risk area that may be associated with your experience. It can be, as you can see, things that almost send you in panic, like misinformation or propaganda, but that exist. Addiction in the dopamine economy is part of practically every social game, and possibly gamification. So social networks as well. So yeah, it is something that you might be working on at some point in your career. But there are also more subtle things like, bias that come with algorithm. Are these algorithm going towards white people, for example, either showing picture of white people or giving me, if I'm looking for meeting someone, can I meet also black dudes, for example, as friends? But yeah, so that is something that will take a bit more work or investigation to be dig up, basically to realize that we have something that actually is not is not so impactful or so responsible. And ethicalOS.org is the collective that came up with this list of risks. They have a lot of resources that will give you a link, and that are lovely to read about. Not the risks themselves, but the work around them is really interesting and inspiring. Against those risks, you can choose, how, again, keeping things a bit high level, you can choose the sort of values or behaviors of your experience, the experience you're building, the same way you're working on the behaviors or values of your team or your organization. And you can actually choose what the experience will convey. Will it be honest, deserving, open, and so on and so on. Well, I'll show you the link also to the book and some of the resources from Responsible. Unfortunately, I think it's only in French. They wanted to translate it, but they stopped at some point. But if you guys, want help with that, we're more than happy to oblige. At this stage, you might be surrounded with a lot of doubts. I would be personally, this guy talking to us about doing good stuff where it's not the topic of my team, it's not the priority, is not given any practical advice so far. I'm not even the decision maker, and anyway the product is online. All of these are, and more other doubts are legitimate. It's just our I think it's just our brain trying not to change. Our brain is somewhat lazy, as hopefully we all know in this community, being UX experts, and he finds very rational thoughts to make sure we don't have to carry too much about changes. But yeah, we have to. So let's go with it. And to do that, we're going to, as I mentioned before, we're going to look at how a digital experience can, also must be, responsible, sober, and inclusive. All right, let's get practical. Right, and let's start with responsible digital experiences. So defining the character, as just mentioned before, of our digital experience is a decisive step. And the good thing is, it is at the end of the day only the representation of design choices, and I'd say even the team choices in general. So we say design because design is the art of influencing behaviors, but in the end, every person in the team, being at strategic level, designer, software developer, or IT marketeer, can make those choices that can define an experience that would be honest, reliable on data, and predictable. So why those three, you might ask? Well, these are three, and everything after that we're going to see, those are three behaviors that are fairly simple to implement. So we've chosen things that, you can start working on right now, guys. So not only everyone can make it, but also you can make it. We've not chosen anything that is impossible for you to do. We're not offering you a revolution. I love that very much, but that's not the case. This is very much about how you can do things with your brain not panicking and seeing fairly rapid impacts. So how, what would it mean, basically, being honest? For example, it's about actually things that are starting to emerge, like, clarity of consent, giving explicit control to the users, facilitate. Usually it is easy to get in, harder to get out, canceling or unsubscribing or registering. So, it's usually 2 clicks or 1 click to register to a newsletter, but there are still newsletter or programs where when you want to opt out, you're going to this fairly intricate double clicking or list of options, and only at the end of the page, not even every time, there is a button that says unsubscribe me from everything. And are you sure you want to unsubscribe, and do you want to resubscribe? So yeah, there's a limit to that. You want out. No is no, basically, right? So but I think we're getting there. Another example where there's still progress to be made is terms and conditions of use in general. So the problem is none of us has the skill and let's be honest, the skills to read them. So some websites or products actually do excerpts on either what's new or what would be the key information. They don't say don't read the rest. Of course, they say you should still read everything. But they give guidance. Basically, they give a bit of guidance, and I think that's really is a best practice that is not too complicated. I will probably earn you a lot of kudos with your legal team. Being reliable on the data, it's it started with a GDPR policy and device permission. But when you go a bit deeper, you guys have to look at how the data is used. Is it secured? Is it misused? It's not used for what you intended. Do you have a view on that? Do you have control on that? It's not that complicated, but you have to look for it. And of course, there is the whole question about third parties and partners. How do you know that the data is being used in the way you intended? Being predictable, it starts with error management. There will always be errors. The error can actually be on the user side because I forgot to fill some field in a form. Well, it can also be, a server crashing, request not found, page not found, whatever. So you have to basically account for that and make sure you can manage those errors. We'll put in a link to one of our blog article, which is exactly about that. How do you manage errors through UX? It's really interesting. It makes a difference. Of course, onboarding, being clear and clear and again back to honesty, avoiding black box effects. You as much as possible, you have to explain what you do what you say what you do. So let's take a counter example here. If you say you are booking your next ski holidays and everything's going fine, you find the apartment, you booked for ski courses, for example, whatever. Only at the end appears suddenly, a laundry option, a parking option, insurance, and none of that was there. Again, it might be good in the short term in terms of conversion, but it's not going to stand for a long time. It's as we go, the standards for the standards for doing the right thing in this instance being predictable will increase, and we'll have to we all have to be as straightforward as we can on those options and what they do and why they're not there in the first place, for example. Again, if you want to have a more beyond the tips, let's say, if you want to have a more systematic and processed approach, you can use some of the existing frameworks, such as usability heuristics from NNG, Nielsen Norman Group. And also, we like the responsible one I told you about before, because it might not be the biggest one on the environment part, but it has the huge merit to be a bit more transversal, also looking at, impact in the general terms, like we're trying during this webinar. So including inclusivity, accessibility, ethics, and so on. So very, very useful frameworks where you can, can basically state where you guys are and, where you would like to go or be. Ethical OS collective toolkit, as I mentioned before, very useful, and some more reading, understanding digital ethics and digital sustainability. Right. On to our second point, which is a sober digital experience. So I'm trying to move forward a bit faster, just to keep this short and sweet. But basically, how can we design experiences that consume less, basically? And that is about being simple, not overdoing it, doing it in the most economic way or energy saving way, but they go sort of hand by hand. So being frugal and being relevant. No need to add extra features or features that won't be used, because that's going to consume a lot of resources for nothing. And just to take a concrete example about that, when you look at the main reason for energy and resource consumptions being, device renewal, data storage, call optimization, and again, non-essential features, is the experience you're trying to build pushing people toward using 5G features, for example? Because if you do, then you're also encouraging them to buy a new smartphone. And if many other experience builders are doing the same, then, we are all encouraging the market to buy as many newer smartphones as possible. Whereas if we do the reverse, trying to build experiences that actually work with the current generation, but even maybe with the previous generation, we are slowing this down. We are looking and working towards sobriety. Now, moving on from best practices to a concrete example, one of our customer, NOU, is a European media co-work between a French and German channel, TV channels. And they designed this media for the younger generation that wants to do something about the environment. And of course, the media had to be consistent with that purpose. So it's a media with a purpose, and as such, it had to be sober itself. So a concrete example of that was working on illustrations. Obviously, size of files and pages and servers is a major driver of energy consumption in IT, and therefore Green IT tries to limit that. And so working on the illustration size would have a great effect. So for that purpose, for example, first of all, they didn't store very high size sources on Photoshop. They tried to keep even that as minimal as possible. And then they made extreme choices in terms of color palette and processing and compression, basically. So you can see, the result is actually, what is interesting is that the image resulting from that is not only light, which comes with what we're trying to achieve, but also as the personality. It actually drove the personality of the brand doing this. And the end result, once integrated, is is actually very low with 22.5 kilobytes and 0 with cache reload. But of course, to sort of go in that direction, they wanted, and that's why they worked with us. But they wanted to know at which point they would be credible with users, also at which point user would sort of stop being interested in the media, because you can argue that the best case for this media would be no media, nothing. Nothing is 0 kilobyte, right? So how do you come with the minimal that actually is also interesting for users and cover their needs? So we went through different stages of user research with the Know team to find that right balance with them, and obviously involve very much the technical team because of the influence beyond, let's say, classic assumption of UX. More on this topic, the intro guide to digital eco-design, our webinar with Nowu. It's in French with English subtitles, and an English article this time on eco-design and UX on our blog. And the last but not least, last but not least, sorry, aspect is inclusivity. So, I mean, we put here a fairly detailed definition because it's part of the work we've done with the AFNOR, which is working on defining specification, and in this case, on digital inclusivity. So we were, part of that work group coming up with this. But basically, digital inclusion is how you make sure that everyone, whatever the situation, is able to use the technology. So that's as simple as that. And to do that, you have to look at their functional, cognitive, linguistic, and emotional needs, which will be different between individuals. So when we do this, it's actually fairly well documented. And there are solutions. So let's take just those 3 examples or 3 categories of visual, motor, and cognitive solutions. So when it comes to visual solutions, you can basically work on everything that makes things more readable and distinguishable. So improving contrast, line spacing, text size, decreasing brightness for people that might be sensitive to the light. And all of that already will have a great impact even before you start working on vocalization systems. Although, working on your alternate text will already do a lot. Model solutions, a bit less known, but some of us are less precise when it comes to the interface and thinking mouse, trackpads, and all of that. So you can help people with that when enlarging clickable area, spacing them. And I'm a big fan of shortcuts. So, anyone that that sets up keyboard shortcuts or keyboard navigation is my friend, basically. And finally, cognitive solutions. It's more about making sure you are understood and adapting the language level to your audience. But also in its layout, choice of typography and spaces between the letters. Think of adopting ERU, easy to read and understand content. It's a framework that give you guidance on how to write something that people will understand based on their language level, education, and so on and so on. So. And actually, there are easy solutions for some of this. There is guidance on inclusive forms, for example. This is one example from Princeton University. But there is also things that, before this presentation, you might think, how am I going to help someone that has presbyopia or arthritis or Wilson disease? So one of our clients, Facility, is actually providing a lovely solution for that. Basically, they changed the CSS of the website. It works as a plugin. So you're on any website that has this plugin and you say, I have arthritis, CSS will change accordingly. it's immediate. It's very, yeah, it's really good. It does take a lot of the job that we just talked about. And again, some more clarity and elements that you guys can use either for your own culture or for evangelization internally, checklist and inclusion strategy from the UK government. Right. So we're almost at the end. And as I said, I hope you perceive now that such a responsible, sober, and inclusive digital experience is going to work alongside your business objective. Because as we saw, we are working on conversion. We are reducing the weight of the website, so improving performance, which we know is a key element in conversion. We are working on brand perception, which, because doing good is going to attract more people and make a better impression. And similarly, as we just saw with inclusivity, we are widening our audience, but also addressing them correctly, which is a huge difference. So who wouldn't like that, basically? And again, now is the time when GDPR laws and cookie acceptance came into play. Those who had already worked on that, it didn't change anything for them. Those who didn't, for some of them, they literally lost days of sales because of bugs, unanticipated whatever that basically disrupted their business. So yeah, don't wait for legislation, get ahead with it. And again, I guess you see that it's not that difficult for many of those aspects. But before we conclude, I said, I spent a lot of time during this presentation trying to say that, it's compatible with doing business. It's compatible with doing business. But I think I'm trying to, help you with managing people's resistance. What we believe at Ferpection really is that, and it might be strange from a user research company, is that actually we're going to change to a new paradigm. And in that paradigm, business objective will at least have to live with impact objectives. And so from our point of view, where we are helping customer being user-centric, it's more about how can we move from a user-centric design model to an impact-centric model. The good thing for us is obviously, by us, I mean the community of UX people, is that understanding, intervening, and finding the right balance will still rely very much on UX research, and so very much be useful to this new paradigm. And with that, that's all I had for you guys today.